The movie Pacific Rim is big in every way imaginable. Guillermo del Toro's love letter to monster movies has big giant robots, big giant kaijus, and a vast yet intricate production. Between the massive sets, a combination of practical and digital effects, tons of different robot and monster designs, and the overall enthusiastic energy coming from del Toro, the film's production is just about as epic as the movie itself. The story is pretty straightforward. In an alternate future, the world is being ravaged by giant monsters called Kaijus that have crawled out from portals to another dimension within the ocean. While the first few attacks caught everyone off guard, humans eventually engineered giant robots called Jaegers to fight them off, and as a result, start winning most of the engagements. Our hero Rowley, played by Charlie Hunnam, piloted the Jaeger Gypsy Danger with his brother. That is, until a kaiju rips his brother straight out of the cockpit. This defeat, among many more like it, leads to the unified world governments ending the Jaeger program. The down-and-out Rowley resigns himself to construction work until one day, his commanding officer Marshal Stacker, played by Idris Elba, asks him to come back and pilot a Jaeger once again. From here, we're introduced to Mako Mori, a promising young co-pilot played by Rinko Kikuchi. Together, with the help of a few other key players, they hatch a plan to take the kaiju down for good, which they successfully execute in the final act. The concept for Pacific Rim came about when screenwriter Travis Beacham was strolling along the coastline near Santa Monica Pier in 2007. He had met Guillermo del Toro back in 2006 to develop the fantasy script Killing on Carnival Row, but the project never materialized. Beacham said he often took walks when he needed inspiration, and as he looked up at the foggy shoreline, he imagined a giant robot and a giant monster peeking out of the mist. Immediately, he knew that he wanted to write a treatment that focused on a giant robot pilot, and initially sought to write a script about loss and survivor's guilt experienced by these pilots. While Beacham worked on other scripts and projects, del Toro was gearing up for two major productions. He'd been slated to direct The Hobbit in 2008, and worked on the pre-production for about 2 years, but ended up quitting after multiple delays. After that, in 2010, he was on board to direct an adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness for Universal Pictures, but that ultimately fell through too. However, this project's cancellation freed up time for a collaboration with Beacham, and he began working with him on the script for Pacific Rim. Del Toro and Beacham worked on the script for about a year. Guillermo, who is also credited as a writer for the film, said he wanted to take the monster movie and look at it from viewpoints he had never seen before, like a chance perspective of a kaiju attack and a kaiju pregnancy. Meanwhile, Beacham incorporated his original themes of loss into the script. Rowley has lost his brother and feels deep pain over this, while Mako yearns for revenge after a kaiju killed her family. With the film, del Toro sought to make a movie that would introduce kids to the wonderful world of monster movies. A childhood fan of monster movies himself, he wanted a new generation to experience the sense of wonder and joy that he felt when watching movies like Ishiro Honda's The War of the Gargantuas. This love and fascination with creatures is a staple of Guillermo's body of work, evident in his earlier films like Mimic, The Devil's Backbone, and Blade 2, all the way up to his more recent movies, including his two phenomenal Hellboy films and The Shape of Water. When it came to creating Pacific Rim, he took great care to keep anything too complicated, dark, or adult out of the movie. He wanted the film to retain a certain childlike innocence. Del Toro explains, "There is a guiltless glee in the fact that monsters are destroying a city. There is no consequence. It has no relationship to the real world. There should be no people in the streets, nobody in the cars, and nobody in the buildings so that we can really go at it." Del Toro also stated that he wanted to avoid any militaristic themes and focus on something more humanistic. In his view, there were enough movies glorifying war. He wanted his film to boil down to something much simpler and much more pure. He said the message he wanted to give kids was, "We can do this together," and that is one of the underlying themes driving the film. While the Jaegers were developed by world governments, we meet our heroes when the world had given up on the program, and it's through a sense of community and family that the resistance continues to fight against all the odds. In order to boil the movie down to the simple message and keep it from getting too convoluted, about half an hour of expository dialogue was ultimately cut from the film. Fellow visionary Mexican directors Alfonso Cuarón and Alejandro González Iñárritu actually helped edit these scenes down, and they're listed in the special thanks section of the movie's credits.
Whatever. Okay, good. Okay. Who is that guy? Every take, he comes up to me and says something or other. Who is it?
Legendary Pictures gave del Toro free rein when it came to casting. He took the opportunity to scout a ton of actors that he always wanted to work with. As a fan of the BBC show Luther, he knew that he wanted to get Idris Elba. Charlie Day and Bern Gorman were chosen to play the argumentative lead scientists, and del Toro regular Ron Perlman appears as the black market organs dealer Hannibal Chow. Guillermo explained that he wanted to create a story where everyone, Jaeger pilot or not, could contribute to the operation, adding to the core theme of "we can all do this together." On the set of Pacific Rim were a large team of dedicated designers, costumers, sculptors, and more who brought the world of the Jaegers and Kaiju to life. Principal photography for the film lasted 103 days. Incredibly, Del Toro would work 17 to 18-hour days, 7 days a week, so the man must have been fueled on coffee and pure enthusiasm. In fact, his crew members would jokingly refer to him as a bat since he never seemed to sleep. The director of photography was frequent Del Toro collaborator Guillermo Navarro, who had previously worked on the Hellboy films, Pan's Labyrinth, and The Devil's Backbone. While the two had a great shorthand and clear understanding of what they were going for, this was the first film he ever shot digitally, using Red Epic cameras, which feature 5K sensors capable of capturing 1 to 120 frames per second at full resolution. In total, they had about 15 different cameras on set. The film employs a mix of both practical effects and CGI. The visual effects were handled by the geniuses at Industrial Light and Magic, who were no strangers to bringing machines and monsters to life, with their phenomenal contributions to the Star Wars films, the Pirates of the Caribbean series, and the Terminator sequels, among many more. Del Toro stated that he wanted the effects to feel operatic. Special effects supervisor John Knoll was told by Del Toro to tap into his inner Mexican and saturate the greens, pinks, and purples during the battle scenes. Guillermo also stressed that lighting needn't match from shot to shot. This unconventional method led to a more artistic and unique feeling, and no one can deny the utter beauty of seeing Gypsy Danger fighting a kaiju amongst the Hong Kong neon lights. To further add to the operatic feel Del Toro wanted, the visual effects team was often instructed to make a CGI Hokusai wave, a wave modeled after the famous woodblock painting, The Great Wave off Kanagawa by Hokusai. Del Toro said he wanted to make the water and ocean battle sequences become almost another character.
There are things you can't fight, acts of God. You see a hurricane coming, you have to get out of the way. But when you're in a Jaeger, suddenly you can fight the hurricane. You can win.
Costume designer Kate Holey recounted that on set, Del Toro also utilized copious amounts of artificial rain and would often slick the floors of the set to add a dramatic, weathered look. Hawley said that it was the messiest, dirtiest movie she'd ever worked on because, in addition to the rain, there were also bountiful amounts of dust and rust effects. As a kid, Del Toro remembered that in the Star Wars films, everything had a certain used look to it. He wanted to emulate the same effect, so we often used dirt and rust to artificially age the set pieces. According to Variety magazine, the crew utilized 101 sets in total, which is insane. These sets were mostly built using stages at Pinewood Studios in Toronto, 2 of these being the largest shooting stages in the entire world. Perhaps the most intricate use of practical effects was utilized during the scenes in the Jaeger cockpit, or conpods. Instead of using CGI or motion capture suits for these sequences, an elaborate stage was built, and puppeteers from Legacy Effects would use hydraulics to simulate kaiju strikes. Stunt coordinator Branko Araki was responsible for choreographing the scenes in the conpods. He explained that since robots are so much larger than humans, they moved much more differently. Araki had to choreograph their movements much slower than usual in order to match cuts between actors and the CGI robots. Stunt doubles weren't actually used during these scenes, so the actual actors would suit up and prepare to get thrown around. The suits themselves were primarily designed by Kate Holey and Shane Mahan, who notably designed the MCU's Iron Man suit. These suits combined with the rig were quite difficult to get in and out of. Even just a quick bathroom break would end up taking an hour, 30 minutes to take the suit off, and 30 minutes to put it back on. Mahan said the hardest part was fitting the machines to the actors and making sure they were comfortable enough to act in them. According to Del Toro, the Conpod set broke every actor at some point. It was, after all, incredibly strenuous. Everyone was pretty worried about Rinko Kikuchi, the smallest of the pilots. However, she was the only one that didn't complain. When she was asked how she kept it together, she said she just thought about chocolate and happy things.
So we had a piece of machinery that was a couple of tons in weight in their backs and in their legs and in their arms. We needed to waterproof incredibly deadly, dangerous currents of electricity. I invented a torture machine.
I really don't know what any of those guys were talking about. I think they're just really soft, to be honest, because I didn't think it was that bad.
As is to be expected, the Kaiju and Jaeger designs were treated with great care. Del Toro crammed 16 concept artists into his garage, and the crew would, as Del Toro described, draw all day like kids. In total, the team designed about 100 different Jaegers and 100 different Kaiju. Not all of them made it into the movie, of course, and every week the team would have an American Idol-esque elimination to see which designs would make it into the final film. The Jaegers were influenced by different countries. Rowley and Marco's Jaeger, Gypsy Danger, was modeled after the Art Deco buildings of the NYC skyline and fighter aircrafts like the Vought F-4U Corsair. Concept artist Oscar Ciccani and Del Toro shaped it to look ultra-American, designing it to have a gunslinger-like gait. On the other hand, there's the Cherno Alpha, a blocky Russian Jaeger, which is based on Soviet T-series tanks. The Russian team suits are also markedly different from that of the Gypsy Danger team. Theirs are more steampunk and retro, while Gypsy Dangers are more modern and sleek. As for the kaiju, they were largely influenced by animals and sea creatures. The kaiju that utilizes electromagnetic charges, known as Leatherback, had its movements modeled after an ape to create its menacing brawler stance. Otashi, the large acid-spitting kaiju who gets the most screen time, is a homage to mythical Chinese dragons. Another kaiju, Knifehead, actually bears a strong resemblance to Guron, a monster who appeared in the 1969 movie Gamera vs. Guron. However, the concept artist who made Knifehead's silhouette, Wayne Barlow, had actually never seen Guron before. Guillermo emphatically did not want the movie to be considered his Godzilla. Sure, the films of Ishiro Honda hugely influenced Pacific Rim, but Del Toro wanted to avoid directly referencing such films. In fact, he specifically instructed his design team not to watch films like Gamera or Godzilla because he didn't want those films to cloud their imaginations. That being said, plenty of anime and films have been infused into Pacific Rim, including, but certainly not limited to, Tetsujin 28, Voltron, Space Giants, and Ultraman. Initially, the movie was not meant to have a 3D release. Del Toro and the visual effects team were worried that the 3D aspect would throw off the scaling of the monsters and robots. However, Guillermo eventually changed his mind and a 3D release was created. The conversion took 40 weeks longer than the average 3D conversion, due to scaling and quality requirements needing to be met. Ultimately, Pacific Rim was a huge success. The film made over $411 million at the box office and made more than $37 million off Blu-ray and DVD sales. It had an elaborate marketing campaign featuring 2 online videos that utilized a found footage approach. Another promo video was released that showed Perlman as Hannibal Chow, advertising his fictional black market auction shop. A promotional graphic novel, Pacific Rim, Tales from Year Zero, was also published, which looked at the first few kaiju attacks and explored the antiverse from which the monsters came from. Action figures of both kaiju and Jaegers were produced as well. In 2018, the atrocious sequel Pacific Rim Uprising was released, which Guillermo did not help write or direct, featuring Kikuchi, Day and Gorman reprising their roles alongside newcomer John Boyega. Guillermo del Toro has stated that Pacific Rim was a very personal film for him. 2 large projects falling through had put him in a rut emotionally, so when he got the okay from Legendary Pictures to get started on Pacific Rim, he felt he needed to prove to himself that he could still have fun making movies. "I don't have an industry to prove myself to," Del Toro said, "but I did need to see if I could access that feeling of sheer joy I used to get when I was making a movie again." He ultimately was able to tap into that joy again. Later, he said that Pacific Rim was the only shoot he completely enjoyed. The sheer enthusiasm on his part is palatable. Anyone watching Pacific Rim cannot deny that a lot of love and care was put into it. What more can you really ask for in a movie? We get to see one of the greatest monster movie directors and visionary filmmakers of our generation doing his thing scaled to 100. We get to see beautiful design work in the form of both the Jaegers and kaiju, a touching story about loss, grief, friendship, camaraderie, and perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds, and we witness things that blow up beautifully. With that having been said, that's all for today, folks. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content, and if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.